Kevin McCarthy walked into the House Oversight Committee hearing room on March 14th with the confidence of a man who believed the storm had passed. 7 months had elapsed since his historic removal as Speaker of the House. 7 months since that October night when 8 Republicans joined Democrats to end his tenure in a vote that shattered 234 years of precedent. He had survived the initial scrutiny, weathered the news cycles, rebuilt his image on conservative media circuits, and now he was testifying as a private citizen about his time in leadership. The hearing was supposed to be routine. Former speakers testify occasionally. They offer insights, defend their records, answer predictable questions from allies, deflect harder questions from opponents, and leave with their legacies largely intact. McCarthy had prepared for this appearance the way he had prepared for hundreds of hearings during his political career. He knew the likely lines of questioning. He had talking points ready about his achievements as Speaker, his fiscal responsibility, his commitment to transparency. His staff had wargamed the session. They anticipated attacks on his leadership style, questions about the debt ceiling negotiations, criticism of his concessions to the Freedom Caucus. What they had not anticipated was Jasmine Crockett. More specifically, they had not anticipated what Jasmine Crockett had spent 3 months preparing in a basement office with 2 researchers, 4 banker boxes of documents, and a singular focus that would have impressed a federal prosecutor. McCarthy took his seat at the witness table. He adjusted his microphone with the casual ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. He smiled at the Republican members who had defended him during his removal. He nodded cordially toward the Democratic members, the political calculation clear in his eyes. Remain pleasant, appear reasonable. Project the image of a statesman unfairly maligned by partisan politics. When the chairman opened the proceedings and recognized Representative Crockett for her opening statement and questions, McCarthy's expression barely shifted. He had seen her speak before. He knew she was articulate, prepared, effective in her questioning. But she was a freshman Democrat from Texas, someone who had been in Congress for barely 2 years when he lost the speakership. In the unspoken hierarchy of Washington, she was not someone he considered a threat. That dismissal was visible in his posture, in the slight tilt of his head, in the way he settled back in his chair as she began to speak. It was the body language of a man who had debated presidential candidates, negotiated with presidents, run the House of Representatives for 9 months under the most difficult political conditions in modern history. Whatever she had prepared, he believed he had seen it before. Whatever questions she would ask, he believed he had heard them before. Whatever documents she might reference, he believed he could explain them. He was Kevin McCarthy, former Speaker of the House, second in the line of presidential succession for nearly a year, a man who had raised hundreds of millions of dollars for Republican candidates, who had been in Congress for 17 years. She was a freshman representative asking questions at a hearing. The arrogance was not loud. It was the quiet confidence of institutional power. Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still at her position on the dais. Her hands rested on a closed folder in front of her. She wore a navy suit, minimal jewelry, no visible notes beyond the folder. When she spoke, her voice was measured, almost conversational. She thanked the chairman. She thanked the former speaker for appearing. She acknowledged his years of service. Her tone carried no hostility, no partisan edge, nothing that would put him on his guard. It was the voice of someone asking a colleague about their day. Then she asked him to confirm something for the record. During his tenure as Speaker, he had repeatedly stated his commitment to fiscal responsibility and government transparency. Was that accurate? McCarthy confirmed it without hesitation. Of course, that had been the foundation of his speakership. Fiscal discipline, transparent governance, accountability to the American people. He had said it in dozens of speeches, hundreds of interviews. It was his brand. Crockett nodded as though this was exactly the answer she had expected. She opened her folder with the careful precision of someone handling something important. Inside were tab dividers, color-coded sections, documents arranged in an order that suggested months of preparation rather than hours. She removed the first document and placed it gently on the table in front of her, smoothing it flat with one hand. It was a procurement report from the Government Accountability Office, dated November 2023, stamped with official seals, marked as a response to a congressional information request. She did not hand it to McCarthy yet. She simply let it sit there between them. During his 9 months as Speaker, she said, his office had overseen approximately $47 billion in discretionary House operations budget allocations, office renovations, technology upgrades, security enhancements, and special project funding. Was that figure approximately correct? McCarthy confirmed it was in the general range. These were standard operational expenses, he explained. Every speaker manages them. The House is a large operation. Technology needs constant updating. Security had become a major concern. Renovations were ongoing. It was basic institutional maintenance. Crockett let him finish. Then she asked a follow-up question with the same conversational tone. Of that $47 billion, how much had been subject to competitive bidding processes as required by House procurement rules established in 1996? McCarthy paused for the first time. The question was more specific than he had expected. He responded that the vast majority had followed proper procedures. His staff had been meticulous about compliance. Every major contract had been reviewed by House counsel. The processes were standard. She opened the GAO report to a marked page. According to the Government Accountability Office's review, completed at the request of Democratic members after his removal, $23 billion in contracts during his speakership had been awarded without competitive bidding. The report was dated November 2023. It had been made public 3 weeks ago. She had downloaded the full unredacted version from the GAO website that morning and brought printed copies for every member of the committee. She slid one across the table to McCarthy. The page was marked with a yellow tab. The figure was highlighted. $23 billion, no competitive bidding, direct awards to pre-selected contractors. McCarthy's face began to lose some of its color, though his voice remained steady. He explained that emergency contracts were sometimes necessary. Security threats required fast action. Technology upgrades could not wait months for bidding processes. The House counsel had approved every single contract. This was not irregular. This was the reality of managing a complex institution during a crisis period. Crockett nodded again with that same careful neutrality. She removed a second document from her folder. This one was thicker, bound with a black clip, marked with a tab labeled Contractor Analysis. It was a spreadsheet compiled by the Congressional Research Service at her request, cross-referencing every no-bid contract awarded during McCarthy's speakership against Federal Election Commission donor records. The document showed which contractors had donated to McCarthy's campaign accounts, leadership PACs, and associated political organizations in the 18 months before receiving no-bid contracts from the House. Of the 47 contractors who received no-bid awards totaling $23 billion, 43 had donated to McCarthy-affiliated political organizations. The donations ranged from $50,000 to $4 million. The contracts ranged from $12 million to $8 billion. The average time between donation and contract award was 47 days. She read these figures slowly, clearly, with the tone of someone reading a grocery list. No judgment in her voice, no accusation. Just numbers. The room had gone very quiet. The typing from the press gallery had slowed. McCarthy gripped the edge of the witness table, his knuckles whitening slightly. He called the implication outrageous. Donations to political campaigns were legal. Contractors who did business with the government often participated in the political process. The contracts had been awarded based on merit, based on capability, based on the needs of the House. The correlation was coincidental. His voice had risen slightly in pitch. Crockett let him finish. Then she removed a third document. This one was a set of invoices, payment records, and project completion reports for a company called Stratton Security Solutions. Stratton had received a no-bid contract for $8 billion to upgrade House security systems in June 2023. The owner of Stratton Security Solutions was Dennis Cartwright, a longtime Republican donor who had contributed $1 million to McCarthy's leadership PAC between January and May of 2023. The contract had been awarded on June 3, 41 days after the final donation. According to the House Office of Inspector General's report, another document Crockett had obtained through a formal request, the security upgrades specified in the contract had never been completed. The cameras were never installed. The access control systems were never upgraded. The perimeter security enhancements were never implemented. But Stratton Security Solutions had been paid in full, $8 billion, transferred in 3 installments over 4 months. The payment records were attached to her folder. She had copies for the committee. She had copies for McCarthy. She had copies for the press gallery. All of them showed the same thing. Contract awarded June 3rd. Payments made July 15th, September 2nd, October 20th. Total amount paid, $8 billion. Total amount of work completed according to the Inspector General, 0. McCarthy's face had gone from pink to pale. He demanded to know when this Inspector General report had been completed. Crockett told him it had been finalized on February 28, 2 weeks ago. It had been delivered to the House Administration Committee on March 1st. She had requested a copy on March 2nd. She had received it on March 4th. She had spent 10 days verifying every detail with source documents, contractor records, and payment ledgers before deciding to raise it in this hearing. She wanted to be certain. The former speaker attempted a deflection. He said these were complex operational matters that required context. Inspector General reports were often incomplete. They did not account for the full scope of ongoing projects. Security work involved classified elements that could not be included in public reports. The suggestion that no work had been completed was absurd. He had personally toured facilities where upgrades were in progress. Crockett removed a fourth document. This one was a declaration signed by the current House Administrator, appointed after McCarthy's removal, confirming that no security infrastructure matching the specifications in the Stratton contract existed anywhere in the House complex. No new cameras, no upgraded access systems, no enhanced perimeter security. The declaration was dated March 10th, 4 days ago. It had been signed under penalty of perjury. She had a copy of the floor plans showing exactly which systems were supposed to have been installed and exactly where they were supposed to be located. She had photographs taken by house maintenance staff 2 days ago showing those locations empty, unchanged from 2022. The silence that followed was profound. 10 seconds. 15. 20. The press gallery had stopped typing entirely. Several members of the committee leaned forward. McCarthy's attorney, seated behind him, reached forward and put a hand on his shoulder, but McCarthy did not acknowledge it. His eyes were locked on the documents in front of Crockett. His jaw worked as though he were trying to form words, but nothing came. Finally, he managed a response. He said he would need to review these documents. He had not been aware of the Inspector General's findings. He had relied on his staff. If there were discrepancies, they would need to be investigated, but the implication that he had personally benefited was categorically false. He had never taken a penny from any contractor. Every dollar that went into his campaign accounts was legal and disclosed. Crockett agreed. The donations were legal. The contracts were awarded through processes that, while ethically questionable, did not technically violate House rules because those rules contained loopholes large enough to fly a $8 billion security contract through. What she wanted to establish was whether the former speaker had been aware that the largest no-bid contract awarded during his tenure had resulted in zero completed work and $8 billion in payments to a major donor. McCarthy said he had not been aware. He had trusted his staff to oversee contract completion. He had assumed the work was being done. Crockett opened a fifth section of her folder. This one contained email correspondence obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request filed with the House Office of the Chief Administrative Officer. The emails were between McCarthy's Chief of Staff and Dennis Cartwright, the owner of Stratton Security Solutions. The dates ranged from May 2023 to October 2023. The content was damning. In a May 18th email, Cartwright thanked the Chief of Staff for facilitating the contract process and confirmed that the full payment schedule would allow for maximum flexibility in project timelines. In a July 22nd email, after the first payment had been made, Cartwright wrote that he appreciated the understanding that certain deliverables might need to be adjusted based on evolving circumstances. In a September 30th email, 2 days before McCarthy's removal as Speaker, Cartwright wrote that he hoped current political difficulties would not affect the final payment, scheduled for late October. The final payment had been made on October 20th, 17 days after McCarthy lost the speakership. It had been made by the outgoing Chief Administrative Officer in one of his final acts before the new administration took over. $600 million, transferred to Stratton Security Solutions, for a project that had never been started. Crockett read these emails aloud, slowly, her voice never rising above that same conversational tone. When she finished, she asked McCarthy if his Chief of Staff had informed him of these communications. McCarthy said he could not recall. Crockett asked if his Chief Administrative Officer had informed him that a $600 million final payment was being made for a project with zero completed deliverables. McCarthy said he had not been closely involved in day-to-day contract management after his removal, but the payment had been made before his removal, Crockett corrected. The payment had been scheduled for late October. McCarthy had been removed on October 3rd. The payment had been made on October 20th. That meant the payment had been approved during his speakership, scheduled during his speakership, and executed by staff he had appointed. So the question remained, had he known? The silence that followed lasted 23 seconds. McCarthy stared at the witness table. His hands, which had been gripping the edge, now lay flat, palms down as though he were trying to steady himself. His breathing was visible, his chest rising and falling more rapidly than it had at the beginning of the hearing. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, less certain. He said he had known the payment was scheduled. He had assumed the work was being completed according to contract terms. If it had not been, that was a failure of oversight, not a deliberate act. Crockett removed the final document from her folder. This one was smaller, a single printed page. It was an email from McCarthy's personal account to Dennis Cartwright sent on October 2nd, the day before McCarthy's removal as Speaker. The subject line read, "Final payment." The body of the email was brief. It said, "Dennis, regardless of what happens tomorrow, the payment will go through as scheduled. You have my word." It was signed simply, Kevin. The email had been obtained through a subpoena issued by the House Ethics Committee as part of an ongoing investigation into McCarthy's financial relationships with contractors. The subpoena had been issued in January. The email had been provided to the Ethics Committee on February 15th. Crockett had requested access to it as a member of the Oversight Committee on February 20th. She had received a redacted copy on March 1st and the unredacted version on March 9th, 5 days ago. She had verified its authenticity with the House IT department, which had confirmed that the email metadata matched McCarthy's account and the timestamp was accurate. She read the email aloud. The room seemed to contract. McCarthy's face had lost all color now, his skin nearly gray under the fluorescent lights. His attorney leaned forward and whispered urgently in his ear, but McCarthy waved him away with a sharp gesture that betrayed how rattled he had become. He tried to explain. The email, he said, had been about ensuring continuity. He had not wanted political chaos to disrupt ongoing House operations. The payment was contractually obligated. He had been trying to protect institutional stability. Crockett asked him a simple question. If the work had never been completed, and if he had known on October 2nd that the work had never been completed, why had he promised that a $600 million payment would go through regardless of what happened to his speakership? What contractual obligation existed to pay for work that did not exist? McCarthy could not answer. He opened his mouth twice, but no words came. His hands moved from the table to his lap and back again. He looked toward his attorney, toward the Republican members of the committee, toward the exit. Finally, he said he would need to review the timeline. He could not recall the specific circumstances. The email may have referred to different aspects of the contract. He would need access to his full records, but Crockett was not finished. She had been building to this. The Stratton Security Solutions contract was not an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern. She removed a document from the back of her folder, a summary chart showing 11 other no-bid contracts awarded during McCarthy's speakership to donors who had contributed more than $1 million to his political organizations. Combined contract value, $3 billion. Combined documented work completed according to Inspector General reviews, $340 million. The difference, $96 billion paid for work that was either incomplete, substandard, or non-existent. The figure hung in the air. $3 billion in no-bid contracts to major donors. Less than 15% of contracted work actually completed. Nearly $2 billion in payments for projects that existed primarily on paper. And Kevin McCarthy, who had built his speakership on promises of fiscal responsibility and government transparency, had overseen all of it. At this point in the hearing, something unprecedented happened. Rachel Morrison stood up in the public gallery. She was a woman in her early 60s, silver-haired, wearing a postal worker's uniform. She had been sitting in the back row since the hearing began, waiting for this moment. The chairman attempted to restore order, but Crockett raised her hand and asked if Ms. Morrison might be permitted to address the committee. The chairman, clearly uncertain about procedure but equally uncertain about denying the request, allowed it. Rachel Morrison identified herself. She had worked for the United States Postal Service for 38 years. She had retired in 2022. Her pension had been managed through federal retirement accounts that were supposed to be secure, guaranteed, protected by law. In 2023, she had received a letter informing her that due to budgetary constraints, her pension payments would be reduced by 18%. The reduction had taken effect in July 2023. She had lost $470 per month. Over the course of a year, that amounted to more than $5,000. Over the course of her expected retirement, it would cost her more than $100,000. She did not blame the Postal Service. She understood budgets were tight. She understood that tough decisions had to be made. What she had not understood, until she read the GAO report 3 weeks ago, was that while her pension was being cut, the House of Representatives was paying $8 billion to a security contractor who never installed a single camera. She had not understood that while she was trying to figure out how to afford her medications on a reduced pension, Kevin McCarthy was approving payments to donors who had given his political organizations millions of dollars. Her voice never rose. She did not cry. She simply stated the facts of her situation with the exhausted dignity of someone who had spent a lifetime showing up, doing the work, playing by the rules, and watching people above her bend those rules until they broke. When she finished, she sat down. The room remained silent. McCarthy stared at the witness table. He did not look at Rachel Morrison. He did not look at Crockett. He did not look at the press gallery or his former colleagues or his attorney. He simply stared at the wood grain in front of him as though he could disappear into it. Crockett waited a respectful interval before continuing. Then she returned to her questions. She asked McCarthy if he understood that while he was approving billions in no-bid contracts to political donors, federal workers were seeing their benefits cut, veterans were waiting months for services, infrastructure projects were being delayed, and working families were being told there was no money for the programs they depended on. Did he understand that his decisions had real consequences for real people like Rachel Morrison? McCarthy said quietly that he had always tried to serve the public interest. Budget decisions were complex. Trade-offs were necessary. He had done his best under difficult circumstances. Crockett asked him one final question. She asked if he still believed, as he had stated at the beginning of the hearing, that his speakership had been characterized by fiscal responsibility and government transparency. The silence lasted longer than any previous silence. 30 seconds. 40. Someone in the gallery coughed, the sound sharp and startling. McCarthy's hands trembled slightly on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. He said he had made mistakes. He had relied on staff who had failed him. He had not been as diligent in oversight as he should have been. If federal workers had been harmed by budgetary decisions made during his tenure, he regretted that. It was not an answer. It was a retreat disguised as an answer. Crockett did not push further. She simply thanked him for his testimony, yielded her remaining time, and closed her folder with the same careful precision with which she had opened it. The hearing continued for another 90 minutes, but nothing that followed mattered. McCarthy answered subsequent questions in a monotone. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. When the hearing finally concluded, he stood, declined to speak to the press, and left through a side exit. His attorney followed, already on the phone. The story broke within an hour. By evening, it was the lead on every major network. The footage of the 23-second silence became the most shared political clip of the month. The image of Rachel Morrison standing in her postal uniform became the defining visual. The figure, $3 billion, became the shorthand for everything the hearing had exposed. Jasmine Crockett returned to her office, placed the banker boxes back on the shelf where they had sat for 3 months, and responded to the hundreds of emails flooding her account. She had not set out to destroy Kevin McCarthy. She had set out to establish a simple truth, that no one, regardless of position or power, was exempt from accountability when the evidence was clear and the consequences were real. McCarthy had dismissed her as a freshman Democrat without the standing to challenge him. That dismissal had been his greatest miscalculation, because she had not needed standing. She had needed preparation, documentation, and the patience to build a case so complete that no defense could survive it. The hearing had accomplished something rare in modern American politics. It had taken institutional corruption, rendered it in specific human terms, connected it to real consequences for real people, and done so with a level of evidentiary precision that left no room for partisan interpretation. This was not about Republicans versus Democrats. This was about math. $3 billion in contracts, $340 million in completed work. The difference was not a political opinion. It was simple subtraction. In the weeks that followed, the House Ethics Committee expanded its investigation. The Department of Justice opened parallel inquiries. 3 of the contractors involved in the no-bid awards returned a combined $480 million to the Treasury in settlement agreements. Dennis Cartwright was indicted on fraud charges. Kevin McCarthy announced he would not seek re-election to Congress. His political career, which had survived countless scandals and setbacks, did not survive Jasmine Crockett's 4 banker boxes and 45 minutes of questioning. The hearing became a case study in how institutional accountability was supposed to function. A freshman representative had done what the entire Republican conference had failed to do: hold a leader of their own party responsible for documented misconduct. She had done it without grandstanding, without partisan rhetoric, without appealing to emotion over evidence. She had simply asked questions, presented documents, and allowed the facts to speak. Rachel Morrison returned to her home in Silver Spring, Maryland. Her pension still reduced, her future still uncertain, but she had been heard. Her testimony had mattered. A powerful man had been held accountable, not just in abstract political terms, but in terms connected directly to her life and the lives of millions of federal workers like her. That accountability would not restore her lost pension payments, but it established that someone in Congress understood what those payments meant and was willing to fight for the principle that public service meant serving the public, not serving the donors who financed political careers. Jasmine Crockett had walked into that hearing room as a freshman Democrat from Texas that Kevin McCarthy did not consider a threat. She had left as the representative who had exposed the largest corruption scandal of his career. The dismissal he had shown in his body language, in the tilt of his head, in the casual confidence with which he had settled into his chair, had been transformed into evidence of exactly the kind of arrogance that led powerful men to believe they would never be held accountable. But accountability, it turned out, required only three things: someone willing to do the homework, someone willing to present the evidence, and someone willing to ask the questions that had no good answers. McCarthy had gambled that Jasmine Crockett would not do all three. That gamble had cost him everything.